afternoon, everyone. I am Genevieve Wood of the Heritage Foundation, and we are delighted to be back at CPAC this year. We still hold these truths, do you? All right. Well, welcome to the CPAC All-Star Panel, and I've done enough of these to know that the secret to a good panel, the secret to a good show, are great guests. And we have great guests on the panel today. Joining us, as many of you know, Jonah Goldberg, New York Times bestseller, National Review Online, a visiting fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Jonah, we're glad you're here.
Thanks for having me.
John Gizzi. Who's been covering politics longer than John Gizzi? John is currently the political editor for Human Events, and I would be remiss if I didn't point out that this institution, CPAC, gave you the Journalist of the Year Award back in 2002. Thank you, John, for being here.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
On my left, but you're right, is the one and only Cal Thomas, America's #1 nationally syndicated host. You also see Cal a lot on Fox News Watch, where he sets the media straight on the way they cover the stories, and we're going to do some of that today. And last, but certainly not least, all the way from California, the left coast, Roger Hedcock, nationally syndicated radio show host, and the former mayor of the great city of San Diego. Roger, thank you for being with us. Well, we're going to talk about a lot of topics in the news today. We'll talk about what's going on in the Middle East. We'll talk about where we're headed in terms of 2012 with the presidential race. But I thought we would start with a topic that everybody's been talking about, which is Obamacare, the debate over religious liberty. And to get us started, I thought we would also start with a panelist who couldn't be with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, let's hear from Rachel Maddow.
You guys want to make this only about religion, but listen, Mitt Romney is campaigning. Mitt Romney is campaigning, saying that he would like to end. He would like to end all family planning support at the federal level. He would like to eliminate federal Title X. Rick Santorum says that he would like states to be able to make contraception illegal. You can try to make this an issue of, oh, Democrats hate religion. But the fact is, churches were exempt from this from the beginning. This is about providing health insurance. And the Republican Party is waging war on contraception at this point in a way that and that's where the discussion is at.
Jonah, let me ask you, is the Republican Party waging war on contraception? Does Rachel have it right, or what's the right message on this issue?
We will fight the condoms on the beaches. We will fight. I don't know. I'm waiting for my draft notice for the war against birth control. Some people might just say, looking at me is my contribution enough. But no, look, I mean, the whole point is Rachel Maddow and all these guys, what they have to do is they have to scare the bejeebus out of their base, right? They have to do the whole sort of crazy, Klansmen are coming for your birth control kind of thing. Otherwise, their guys are just going to stay home. And I think that's, one thing you always say about Rachel Maddow is she's always on message.
Roger, what would you say on this? I mean, you're doing a lot of radio talk show on this. You hear from a lot of folks. What are you hearing from your listeners?
Well, we hear a lot of things, but in California, I'll tell you, this is a very primitive debate because in California, we already have free transgender operations in prisons. We've gone way beyond the issue of contraceptives. We tend to have a much more liberal and progressive view of health care as being anything that the liberals want anytime they want it, and you have to pay for it. You see, in California, actually, Genevieve, and this is a warning to all of you who don't live in California, we're living in Obama's second term. We're already there. We already have all of these debates behind us. It isn't a question of whether or not we should have free condoms and be in the war, and so forth. But the question is, should we expand it to all illegal aliens who ever want to come here and all their progeny, and then free education on top of that, as well as, by the way, the welfare departments now lately in California have been giving free refrigerators to illegals who don't have them. So we're much more progressive than anything you've ever seen here before.
Cal, let's talk about this religiously, because this is serious. I mean, and we laugh about it, but this is serious in terms of if they get away with this, what would happen in a second term? And we see a lot of outrage, but if that outrage doesn't turn to action in November, what are we looking at here?
Well, I'm really glad, Genevieve, that you played the Rachel Maddow clip, because I think that she is the best argument in favor of her parents using contraception. I would be all for that. And all the rest of the crowd at MSNBC, too, for that matter. Now, look, all great inhumanities and outrages start at the fringes. So you have the 95-year-old double brain tumor, sclerotic grandma who has signed a living will and wants the government to kill her, although we won't call it like that, and that's how euthanasia gets accepted. You have something like this that is forced into the insurance policies of not only Catholic, but any religious institution, or even a secular one that might not believe in doing this. It doesn't matter. And it's a wedge issue for them. And once they establish the beachhead as a right to do this, then they will use that as precedent for increasing outrages. And the government considers itself God now, in case you didn't know that. I think that since it does consider itself God, that it immediately disenfranchises itself from this on the basis of separation of church and state. How's that?
It works.
That's it.
John, let me ask you, a lot of folks said social issues weren't going to be in the debate this year, but you have this, you have gay marriage being passed again in Washington State, I guess, yesterday, and it's being debated in other places as well. Is this going to bring these issues up to the top of the race or get them in there?
Well, first, let me say, Genevieve, that after having me as the cleanup batter after these three gentlemen, about the only thing that this gentleman can do is die. The fact is that Republicans did not intend to make this a campaign year in which social issues were front and center. I've been to several political conferences in Roger's home state of California, for example, covering Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and most recently Florida. The social issues are almost never brought up. I submit to you and to the CPAC of 2012 that they have been injected into the political debate by Barack Obama. Not the Democratic Party, but Barack Obama. And indeed, this is a president who received 54% of the Roman Catholic vote. And by the way, as someone who has been baptized, received First Communion, confirmed, and married in the Catholic Church, I'm stunned, to say the least. But I also see the divisions beginning already. Senator Marco Rubio told me this morning that the president made this decision on his own against the advice of Vice President Joe Biden, of his outgoing Chief of Staff, William Daley, and indeed, the first members of the Senate to join with Senator Rubio in his legislation to overturn the government coercion of contraception in faith-based hospitals are Robert Casey of Pennsylvania, Ben Nelson of Nebraska, and Joe Lieberman from my home state of Connecticut, Democratic senators all. And I knew Lieberman would get it right once in a while. We could almost forgive him for the defense of Bill Clinton on the Senate floor that time. This is an important issue, and I submit to you that unless the president reverses himself or Senator Rubio's legislation, Senate Bill 2043, to overturn the HHS order becomes law, it will be front and center in the debate, and I can say, I don't make predictions on elections, but Barack Obama will not receive anywhere near 54% of the Roman Catholic vote.
Jonah?
As some of you might guess from my last name, I wasn't baptized in the Catholic Church. But although I have many good Catholic friends who are hoping one day. Anyway.
There's still time, Jonah.
There's always time. No, I think one thing that's important, though, yes, it's a big social issue thing. Yes, it is a gift from God for Rick Santorum that Obama just sort of gave him this big fat pitch, right? But at the same time, I think we should be a little cautious about casting it purely as a standalone social issue. This is simply the fighting wedge of Obamacare. This is when conservatives said, look, there are thousands upon thousands of decisions that are left up to the whims of bureaucrats and technocrats, unelected people who have an ideological agenda, and do we really want to cede that kind of sovereignty, that kind of power to the state under Obamacare? Who knows what could happen? Well, this is just one of the things that could happen. And it's important, I think, not to make this purely like a wedge social issue thing, but to say, hey, look, this is bad on its own right. It's absolutely evil to force these institutions to violate their consciences, but this is also exactly the sort of thing you can expect when the federal government takes over something as central to our lives as our own health care.
And a lot of people are seeing it that way. Would you all agree?
Yeah, I would. But this gets back to the heart of who we are. Are we created or did we evolve from slime? Is the power of the individual more important than the collective power of government? Were our rights endowed by our creator and therefore unalienable, or are they granted by the state? All gets back to the fundamental issue of who we are and what we want to be. And that is really the bottom line debate, and all of these other things are symptoms of that greater debate that we need to be having.
And I think this is important because our candidates, whoever they are and wherever they are, have got to start talking like this. Yes. They've got to start making that bright line. They've got to start saying, look, we stand for this individual liberty. We stand for the idea that the individual American is more important than the government. We stand with the Declaration of Independence describing he sent thither swarms of bureaucrats and so forth. Well, they did, and they're doing it all the time, not just for Catholics on contraceptives. They came for business on cap and trade. They're coming for all of these people in all of these bureaucratic ways, interpreting all of these laws in a new dictatorship which excludes Congress, especially a Congress where there's any Republicans, and gives all power to the het POTUS, by the way. His name is not POTUS anymore, President of the United States. It's het POTUS, His Excellency, the President of the United States.
Just to pick up on that, look what he told Matt Lauer in the Super Bowl interview. He actually criticized the Founding Fathers. He said, Congress has gotten in my way from my ability to really bring change to America. Yes, that's right. It's called the separation of powers, Mr. President. You're supposed to be a constitutional attorney.
Let's talk a little bit about the Republican folks running for the highest office in the land. How are they doing on the message that you all just talked about and really making that case? John, let me come to you on this one. Just rate them. How's Santorum doing? How's Romney doing? Newt, how are they all doing?
Santorum has the credentials to talk about this because he has been so identified with the cultural issues for so long. I first interviewed him when he was a candidate for the U.S. House of Representatives 22 years ago. Who would have thought he'd be where he is today? And again, that was his agenda, a no-holds-barred pro-life stand. He later was in the forefront of debates on marriage, on government involvement in the contraceptive issue, UN funding for birth control, you name it, Santorum was there.
But do you think he's going to be able to broaden it out, as we talked about here, taking it from that and saying, but this applies to just individual rights, period, and people need to be concerned about that?
If he has Jonah Goldberg as a policy advisor and speechwriter per diem, he will. But at the same time, I think other candidates are going to have to look very carefully at this issue and how to address it. Newt Gingrich, to the best of my knowledge, can point to his record in Congress on similar issues, and that was a long time ago. Mitt Romney, as businessman and a governor later in life, never really had to deal with them until the marriage issue came about. I'd say some of the candidates have to play a little bit of catch-up ball. For Ron Paul, this should be very simple. The government's involved in something, it's wrong, and he was probably against this and its prototype.
One of the other issues that we heard a lot about over the weekend and earlier this week was the whole jobs report and the like that came out, and the unemployment rate is going down. And you can debate what exactly all those numbers mean. But one of the questions was, the economy has been a central focus of this campaign. Republican candidates to a great extent have been focusing on it. I want to play a quick clip of David Brooks and him saying he's not sure that's exactly the right message in the long haul. Let's take a look.
I think that's the wrong strategy for Republicans. You can't wage this on the cyclical ups and downs of the economy, because it might get better. God willing, it will get better. So if I were the Republicans, I'd say cyclical, we're doing a little better, but we've got these huge structural problems. We've got the debt, we've got wage stagnation, we've got families falling apart, and highlight the deep structural problems. The message for Romney out of these jobs numbers is, I can't cruise quoting God Bless America, whatever song he quotes. I've got to actually have some big policies, and he's cruising on a bad economy, but that may go away, hopefully.
Cal Thomas,
Yes, Genevieve.
how would you address what David Brooks said? Is he right?
I haven't the foggiest idea what he was talking about in that clip. Look, we didn't just crawl out of a cave. We don't have to invent the wheel or discover the use of fire. We know what works, the principles I grew up with. Live within your means. Don't envy your neighbor. Be responsible for yourself. All of these principles work. We got a $15 trillion debt because the government tries to give everybody everything. It can't do it. You know what Jefferson said? A government big enough to give you everything you need is big enough to take away everything you want. And that's true. And now we can't tell anybody no. It's like Ado Annie in Oklahoma. I'm just a girl who can't say no. This is a government that can't say no to anybody. But it's deliberate. It's addiction. It's like a drug. We got 15% of the country on food stamps. That's a disgrace in the United States of America. That's not something to be proud of. You got half the country getting a government check. We perverted the 23rd Psalm. The government is my keeper, I shall not want. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of poverty, the Health and Human Services Department will be there comforting me with food stamps. It's an outrage.
How do you really feel, Cal?
Yes,
I'm going to give a shameless plug for the Heritage Foundation because it's something you just said.
Yeah.
We just came out with the Index of Dependency, something
Yes.
we've been tracking for 10 years earlier this week. We now have the highest level of people in the United States on a government program or involved in the government program ever in history. Ever in history. 1 in 5 are now getting some subsidy from the government, and over 49% no longer pay taxes. Right. That is the tipping point that we are at. Roger.
And I think that's exactly right. This is by design. We are getting this dependency growing and growing by design so the Democrats will never lose another election. Although they'll run out of Peters to pay Paul. They're going to run out of people to fund this thing or to lend us the money to fund it. But I think what Brooks was saying is a fallacy, that the economy is not going to be an issue. These phony unemployment numbers are so manipulated and so wrong. We know that unemployment is a lot higher. We know that this economy is not recovering, and we know that a government-led, debt-fueled recovery is not working and will not work.
And also, let me add a postscript on this. So many of the characteristics of the economic calumny we are facing in this country we're being dealt with and are being dealt with in Europe right now. And one only has to look at the European countries where, again, the Leviathan was so much bigger than in this country, the hand of the government in people's everyday life greater, and taxes higher, and debt accumulated. And of course, we know about the cases of Greece, and we know about Ireland, and we know about Portugal, and we may know about Italy before long. But I would say to you, and of course, do you ever wonder why more than half the Republicans in Congress want to stop the line of credit for the $100 billion that this country, this Congress, voted to the International Monetary Fund in 2009? I submit to you that in every country in Europe that was facing the flow of red ink, there were 5 governments that dealt with it severely. 5 governments changed hands in Europe in the past year. 2 are now being run by unelected technocrats, Italy and Greece. 3 others completely tossed out the party that had been in power for something different. There's elections coming up in Slovakia, in France, and in Greece, and I submit that there won't be a common pattern except one: throwing out the people who were there and couldn't deal with the problem. I dare say what's happening in Europe could happen here on the economic and political fronts.
Jonah,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Getting back to the Republican field for a second, I mean, a couple things I agree with Roger about. First of all, it has been the aim of American liberalism since at least FDR, if not Woodrow Wilson, to make the American people clients of the state. And then once you're a client of the state, of course you're going to keep voting for the state to keep giving you stuff. And I think that's been the Democratic policy. And when you say that we have the largest number, was it 25% of the American people on 1 in 5 are dependent on the government now, I'm sure the people in the Obama administration look at that and say, see, we've still got 4 out of 5 to go. But I think, look, this is a very serious problem for Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney, his instincts are to go to liberal arguments. His instincts are to go to the numbers. He says, oh, GDP went up, unemployment went down, those numbers are good, so the economy is getting better. That is not the way good politicians should be talking about this. It is not, the numbers are simply these abstractions. The way you talk about it is the way Reagan would talk about it. Are you better off? Are your neighbors better off? When you go to the mall and you see half the stores are closed down, when you see your property values, the value of your own home, those are what people measure the economy in. They don't look at these BLS numbers, and I don't think they're rigged. I just don't think they reveal all that much. And that is, if Mitt Romney or Rick Santorum or Newt Gingrich or Ron Paul or, gosh, whoever wins the brokered convention that I think we're barreling towards, whoever it is, they have to be able to speak to that fact, that elemental fact about what life as lived in the United States is like, not do this sort of, oh, I looked in the Wall Street Journal today and these numbers are improved, so the economy's gotten better. That is a gift to Barack Obama. We can't afford to give him.
Can I follow up on that real quick? That's very good. There's something else we who are conservative make a mistake in doing, and that is playing on the liberal turf. We allow them to set the agenda on taxes and therefore fairness. You're not paying enough. You're not paying your fair share. The debate ought to be shifted by us to how much you are wasting in spending the money that we entrusted to you. The government should not be telling us how much of the money we make they'll allow us to keep. We should be telling them how much of the money we make will allow them to spend. That changes the entire dynamic. Now, the way you do that is if I were president, I'd say, okay, we're going to have an outside auditor come in. You know, Reagan said that the only proof of eternal life in Washington is a government program. It's true. I would take every cabinet agency, every government program, and make them re-justify their existence. Not their budget, but their existence. That would cut it real fast.
Can I nominate him for president?
No.
Cal Thomas for president.
You know what?
Some people are still looking for a candidate, Cal. You could be it.
I couldn't afford the pay cut, but I like the plane.
Let me just...
Go ahead, John.
Okay. Just as a student of history, what Cal Thomas says is not anything fresh or original or unproven.
Still true.
That's still true, though.
In World War II, Congress created a joint committee on unnecessary government expenditures that held hearings and voted from 1942 to 43. And basically, it weighed the existence of government programs up and down and decided on its future. A good part of the New Deal was struck down by the Supreme Court decisions in the 30s. Almost the remainder of it was struck down by this committee, which simply defunded much of the programs that were handling the bulk of domestic discretionary spending before the war. And President Roosevelt had said that if we are going to war, we have to have less domestic spending. And he may not have liked it, but he signed all of the bills that defunded the New Deal agencies that came out of this committee. And it's been done before in World War II.
They will do it in the war on birth control.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Let me ask you all this. As you think about the candidate, the field, and just the debates that we've been having, what's the missing issue, if you will, or the missing message that you don't hear either Romney or Gingrich or Santorum or somebody talking about? I mean, is there something that they're really missing right now that if you were advising, you'd say, this is what you need to be out there on?
Well, look, why was Ronald Reagan so successful? He was so successful because he inspired us. His message was, you can do it. We the people, not you the government, the power of the individual. This is what the founders had in mind. Individual liberty, bubble up morality, not top down from politicians who can't impose it on themselves. The freedom and power of the individual. And so Reagan's greatness was that he saw in us our greatness. And that's why we admired and loved him, apart from his good ideas and bringing down the Soviet Union and all the other stuff. That's why he was inspirational. That's why the commercial in 1984 touched our hearts, Morning in America, unlike the Clint Eastwood thing, which is another issue in the Super Bowl commercial, but which wasn't even shot in Detroit, which I think is a riot. See, again, what Jonah said, this and what has been said by others here, they want a collective. They want dependency because this ensures their power in office. I believe in recycling trash and Congress for the same reason, because each left too long in one place begins to emit a foul odor. Get them out.
What about, let me pick up on something Jonah said, a brokered convention. You really think that's where we're headed?
I think more and more. I think that Rick Santorum's win this week, his trifecta, was a big deal. And I've been fairly liberated as a columnist in that I haven't been super enthusiastic about any of them. I think Mitt Romney's an honest and decent man, but I think what we saw this week was that he has a very hard time connecting with conservatives. There's just something about him that people don't like. He says a lot of the right things, but he says them like he's memorized them from a phrase book, and it becomes a real problem for me. He's sort of like Spock reading a love letter. He says the right things, but he doesn't convey the emotion. That said, they would all be better than Barack Obama. I would have no problem supporting any of them over Barack Obama. But I think, regardless of whether it's right or fair to Mitt Romney or any of these guys, I don't think that it looks more and more like the people of the base of the Republican Party and the Tea Partiers, they want some more items on the menu.
Roger?
Your
Are we
question-
going to get more items on the menu?
Well, look, your question was so
Except
right
Cal,
on.
of course.
Look at these candidates. What have they not said? What I think they've not said is not only that we trust the individual, we're conservatives, we think that it comes up from the people, that's the way that we think the government ought to be organized to serve and protect liberty. But they need to also say, look at the way the economic policies that Reagan fostered because of that philosophy, look how they worked. He took a 10.1% unemployment rate at the peak of the Jimmy Carter recession in 1981-82, turned it in by this time, February of '84, facing the same re-election that Barack Obama is. He had reduced it because of his policies of free markets, regulation, deregulation, lower taxes to 7.1%. Instead of a 1.7% growth rate, which we have now, the growth rate was 7% in the second month of 1984 because of free market. Why aren't these candidates touting that we know what works because we've been there?
Great. Yep.
I want to move on to another topic that is going to affect this race, and is, one of the few things the federal government's actually supposed to do is defend this country, right? And look at our foreign policy. And there's been a lot going on in the Middle East as of late. I'm going to roll a quick clip here that was on, I believe it was Fox earlier this week, from Katie McFarland, just talking about what's happening in Syria, what's happening in Egypt, what's happening in Israel and Iran, and how President Obama's administration is dealing with it. Let's take a look.
It's not just about Syria, and in fact, it all goes back to the root of Iran and really this administration's policy towards the whole region. Initially, Secretary Clinton said that Assad of Syria was a reformer. We could do business with him. President Obama wanted to negotiate with Iran. The United States wanted to reset relations with Russia. Well, what's happened? The Russians are supporting the Syrians. We have no ability to bring international pressure to bear on Syria because the Russians and then the Chinese stand in the way at the UN.
Yeah.
With Iran feels completely emboldened to the point where Iran is sending its own military people to Syria to help with the slaughter. So here we are, almost 4 years of wasting time trying to negotiate with Iran, and the whole Middle East is on fire.
Cal, the Middle East, it does seem to be crumbling right now, and I would argue the Obama administration's foreign policy is going right down with it.
Well, it's true, and it's not just this administration. Over several administrations, the State Department has felt that if we just give those people who want to eradicate Israel, kill the Jews, think the Jews are descended from apes and pigs and cause AIDS, that's just what they say, want to take over the world and create a caliphate. If we just negotiate with them, we give them a little something, get a little more Israeli land, if we speak to them nicer, then they won't want to kill us. Well, you know, if your God has told you to go kill somebody else, where's the negotiating room there? So I write about all of this stuff, and I get hate mail from people who call me an Islamophobe and everything else. I don't say anything that they're not saying. I simply repeat what they say. Now, after a period of time, and after they've killed 3,000 of our own people and shot up Fort Hood and been caught trying to plant bombs in Times Square and doing other things, a prudent person might conclude, I mean, stay with me now, that, gee, maybe at least enough of them are serious that we ought to respond in kind. The only thing, if you read Leon Uris, especially his marvelous novel, The Hajj, the only thing that the Islamic extremists understand is power. The only thing they understand is strength. Reagan's peace through strength has been turned into Obama's war through weakness. And that's what we're being prepared for. They're coming after us because they think we are weak.
John, even Secretary of Defense Panetta said earlier this week, look, Iran is very close to having the nuclear bomb. They can put it over on Israel at any point. I mean, they seem to know what we're up against, but yet don't want to do anything about it.
No, they don't. And the administration's mixed messages and mixed metaphors on foreign policy just leave the non-involved or even the involved observer nonplussed. And I can say this as a White House correspondent. Right after Leon Panetta made that statement, Press Secretary Jay Carney was asked at one of the briefings, has Israel already made its mind on what to do, and is that going to be the basis of U.S. foreign policy? No, that's not the basis, and no, they haven't decided. So in other words, if you look at the phrases carefully and get through all of the diplomatic ease and press talk and fluff, you're finding that the administration, at least as far as the public is concerned, speaks with no solid and firm voice on what is clearly the biggest danger in the Middle East. And remember, even if Iran does not strike at Israel, if it were ever to have a nuclear weapon of any kind, the arms race in the Middle East would commence and accelerate at a level unknown in recent history. Turkey would then pursue getting a bomb, as would other neighboring countries. And we would see what we saw during the Cold War repeated in the Middle East. I submit to you, I say, even if they wouldn't use it against Israel, well, just in the last few days, Khatami, the spiritual leader in Iran, once again referred to Israel as, and I quote, a cancer within the Middle East. And this is the kind of thing that we hear. I'd also say that the situation is further complicated by the fact that we may be dealing with devils we don't know rather than devils we know. What do we really know about the opposition that would come after an Assad, or certainly that's going to come in Libya? Egypt right now is a big question mark. The government that's supposed to be a stopgap regime holds Americans hostages at this point. I'm getting to be more and more sentimental for Mubarak every single day as it goes on.
Jonah, let me ask, I mean, when you look at the foreign policy that this president's put in place, I mean, he talks about he got, Osama bin Laden, great.
He's mentioned that?
Yeah, he's mentioned that a couple times. Yeah, he's mentioned that.
You're sure?
But when you look at it in total, I mean, it's a pretty frightening thing when you look at the situations around the world and what the U.S. role is in it. Where are we headed?
Well, I mean, first of all, he ran on this assumption, basically his campaign promise when it came to foreign affairs was, and actually domestic affairs too, was people of Earth, stop your bickering. I am Barack Obama and I'm here to help. And, the guy campaigned in Berlin, and I'm still trying to figure that part out. But the essence of what he proposed was that, remember from the Cairo speech on forward, is that because Barack Obama is just so super awesome, and his name's Barack Hussein Obama, that everyone, the lions and lambs will lie down together, everything will be just fine. And I think at this point, the gamble for Obama is he thinks that he wins more than he loses domestically by pulling out of Afghanistan. He thinks he wins more than he loses by pulling out of Iraq. And he is, for all intents and purposes, correct if those places don't become humiliating failures in the next year, which I give a 50-50 chance to. The same thing with Iran. He is basically in a position of, it's sort of the equivalent of what's going on with the Euro and Greece, of so much of his presidency is based on matters outside of his control. And he can hold up, Osama bin Laden's head, figuratively speaking, like Medusa's head, and petrify his enemies as much as he likes. That's only going to take him so far. And I don't have any confidence that this guy really knows how to deal with a true international crisis. Giving the go-ahead to SEAL Team 6 was the right thing to do, but it is not quite the same thing as dealing with Iran going to war with Israel or the Middle East blowing up. And when it comes to that kind of thing, he's handled that kind of thing. He's handled most of these things almost as if his own cult of personality will win the day, and I don't think it will.
Roger, when you're talking on your show about these things, I mean, do you get a sense that people are really paying attention to the foreign policy issues here?
In San Diego, where my home base is, there's, of course, a huge military presence of Marines and Navy, and everybody is worried about this. We're drawing down the military. We're eliminating weapons programs. We're going to Plan B and old programs like the B-52 to attempt to keep deterrence. At the same time, we're facing huge new risks in the international field, and a president, and let me say this carefully, who goes to Turkey to make a speech to the Muslim world and whistle, a little dog whistle goes off when he says the U.S. is no longer a Christian nation. And a message goes out to Muslims, and the message is, we're not going to stand behind Christians in your midst, or ultimately the Jews in Israel. And ever since then, Christian populations in every Muslim country have been persecuted, their churches burned, their people run out of the country. It's an outrage.
We only have about a minute and a half left, so we'll do what they call the lightning round, right? And Roger, I'll come back and start over here with you on this one. What's the one thing you think we ought to look at between now and Election Day? What's the issue you think that people ought to keep looking at on the front burner?
I think the issue, as we've touched on here many times in many ways, is liberty. This is an election about preserving the liberty or ultimately losing it. It's that important. That's what 2012 is about.
I think we can't be reactive. We've got to be aggressive. And I would encourage everybody here at the CPAC conference to get on, if you're not already, on Facebook and Twitter, and to communicate with 5 people in your own peer group who are either on the fence or who are tending toward voting for Obama, and show them the facts. Get on the Heritage webpage. Get on some of these other great web pages. Don't just debate philosophy. Show them the facts and try to convert them to the correct point of view. If everybody did that for 5 people, depending on the state you're coming from, California, forget it, you're gone, then we could actually make a real serious difference in this election. But we better go out and do it because, and by the way, get all your dead friends to vote too. That'll help counter the other.
I'm going to make a quick plug for Heritage on that because we have something at our booth, and I encourage you to all go by if you haven't. See this little brochure, this cute little girl, could be your granddaughter, could be your daughter, somebody you know. She's $200,000 in debt today, just like basically everybody in this room 65 and under, because of promises we've made today. Not the ones that are coming in the future, where we are today. We're giving you 5, these in packets of 5, to pass out to folks you know, because it takes that 1 in 5 number, the $15 trillion number, and puts it in a perspective people can see. Everybody knows somebody that looks a little bit like this, and we got to get that message out. John.
All right, what does the future hold and what we should be doing? I'd say pray that the first debate in the general election is held in a teleprompter-free zone.
I know we're over time and it's a lightning round and the CPAC cops will come and get me any second if I go too long. I think basically the way to think about it is this is a referendum on Barack Obama. If you think Barack Obama, his ideas are right, if you think his idea for the role of government is right, if you think that if you find the prospect of Obama without the prospect of having to run for re-election again is scary, you know how to vote, and if you think it's really exciting, you know how to vote. And I think the Republican who can most make this a case about Barack Obama and why it should be a referendum on him and why he shouldn't be reelected, that is the Republican that we need to run in 2012.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank our CPAC All-Star panel.
Good job.